Oh yeah, I forgot. I need to cut this brass tube into fret markers. I've got 5 done so far. I need 12. So I'll explain what I'm doing when I'm finished. Right. So I've just cut 12 brass rings, which are going to be my fret markers. I've also got some abalone dots, which I think I'm going to put inside the brass rings. I've got everything marked on here where I want to drill it, and I've used a brad awl and I've marked the centre point of each of these rings. These are 8mm wide. I've measured it, I've drilled a test hole in something which I've now lost, checked that it fits comfortably, and now what I need to do is find where I put the 8mm drill that I used and go and drill some holes in here. I've made sure that they're all at least 2mm thick. I've left them slightly more so there's material to file away afterwards, and I'm going to set my depth stops so that at the deepest point I'm drilling 2mm into the fretboard. At the shallowest point, because of the radius, it'll probably vary between 1 3/4mm and maybe 1.5. There should be plenty there. But that's my next job, and I'm going to take all of these rings off and I'm going to put them somewhere safe, because if I don't I will probably lose them, because that's what happens in this workshop. And I'm going to take it to the drill with me. I need to glue this fretboard on now, but before I can do that I need to install my truss rod properly. I've stripped the heat shrink sleeving off this because I don't want it there. Once this is in the neck, it doesn't need it. That just kind of restricts the movement a little bit. I shouldn't need all the movement that this has got, but it's better to have it than not. So this is going to go in here. But if anyone's ever had a guitar with a rattly truss rod, you'll know how annoying it can be. And if we can prevent that at all, then we probably should do. So what I've started doing recently is putting a bit of silicone underneath the truss rod. Now you can put a bead of silicone all the way along, but when that sets and sticks to the rod itself, this bit needs to twist, and if it's stuck to the bottom of the channel, it's not going to twist. That's a bad thing. So what I like to do is put a bit at either end just to stop the ends from rattling, and for a base I'll maybe do 2 bits along its length. For a 440-460mm truss rod for standard guitars, I'll tend to just do 1 bit in the middle, and that's enough silicone to cushion it and stop any rattle, but it's not enough to stick the actual bar in place and make it impossible to move. This particular type of truss rod doesn't actually need to twist because it's the enclosed nut at this end, which works as a double action, but it's slightly different to the type that I normally use. This is just one that I've had kind of laying around when I got a few for a couple of basses that I was doing previously. It's not my favourite type of truss rod, but it works the same way. So I'm going to put a little bit more underneath this just to make sure that it doesn't rattle and it holds it in place. And then over the top I'm actually going to put a fillet in this one, which I don't do in many guitars, but some of them I will do. Basically the truss rod sits less than a millimetre below the surface here. It's ever so slightly deeper at this end than it is at this end because of the surface that I've actually skimmed flat, just to make sure I've got the proper surface to glue the fretboard onto. So I'm going to take down this piece of Padook to the same width as the truss rod slot, and I'm going to glue it in here hard against the truss rod, and then I'm going to plane it and cut it flush with the top of the neck, which means that any glue that I put in this truss rod slot also isn't going to end up on the truss rod seizing anything solid. It's good practice. A lot of manufacturers don't do it anymore. A lot do. If you don't get glue into the truss rod, then it's not really the end of the world. The main reason people do it isn't to stop glue squeeze, it's to fill up any empty space and make sure that the truss rod doesn't rattle. And because I can, I may as well. So I'm going to get my little plane and I'm just going to take this down until it fits. I've already started this, so I've got my bench dog all set up, ready to go. I'm not actually worried about getting this perfectly parallel. If I've got a very slight wedge shape to it, that's actually a good thing, because that means I can get a much more snug fit and then trim it off to suit afterwards. So that now fits snugly all the way down. So I'm going to put some silicone in here. Obviously I'm only using very small amounts, so if you put something over the end of the silicone tube, it stops it going off in here and ruining the whole tube. I'm also going to put the tiniest bit on top of the truss rod, just to give a bit of cushioning when I tap this fillet in. Okay. So the way that I often hold them in place is use a bit of medium or slightly thicker super glue, and only a very small amount in little dots all the way down, just so it wicks into the joint and holds it there, because if you think it's less than 1mm deep, once you've trimmed it off, there's not a lot of material there, it's only taking up space. So a little bit there, just practically stitching it in place on the way down, will wick into the gap, and when you remember where you put your accelerator, that just holds everything nice and solid. It saves it popping out and moving around whilst you're trying to chisel, plane and sand and get it nice and flush. Now all I need to do is trim that down. So I'll probably use a hand plane. I've got this one here. If you've got a small violin maker's plane, that's even better, because you can just run that straight up the middle, and any tear out or any time you tilt and miss this fillet, you could take little bits out of the side. If you're using a plane like this, up here you could accidentally take out a fairly important bit of the neck. But if you're using a violin maker's plane, which doesn't reach the sides of the neck, all you've done is give yourself a bit of a cavity to fill with glue. Not ideal, and strictly speaking you shouldn't be doing that, but sometimes you've got to just get away with it. So I need to pull these out for now. My cocktail stick indexing pins will get in the way. And we trim down the fillet. In preparation for gluing this up, I've got 3 of my radiused sanding blocks, and I've put some strips of cork on them, which will put pressure on the side and the centre of this and spread the clamping pressure. I've got them ordered to follow the taper of the neck, so this one will go here at the nut, this one right down at the body joint, and this one in the middle. There'll be a small gap between them, but that's not a problem. I've put some more veneer in this gap between the offcut and the neck itself, and I've got all my clamps ready. So really all there is left to do is remove the fretboard and the veneers and start spreading some glue. I think I'm going to put a little bit of masking tape over this end of the fretboard whilst I spread the first layer on, just to make sure I don't get loads of glue in on the truss rod, which I shouldn't do, but it's better to be tidy. And then as soon as I've done this, I'm going into full-blown glue spreading mode, because I've got 3 veneers and a fretboard to put on now. So let's go.